Hi, in this video I'll go over a software test plan and I'll use the IEEE template and walk through it to show you how a software test plan is created. So typically the test plans are created by the testing team or the quality team within a project, and this very often happens even before development starts. So basically the idea is to analyze all of the requirements and come up with a detailed test plan of what is it that's going to be tested, what kind of testing strategies are going to be used, what kind of tools are going to be used, and a schedule and how the resource allocation is happening. So this helps with planning for the entire testing effort. So I'm going to walk you through this document. So typically it starts out with this first page, which has the name of the project, and if it has gone through multiple revisions, then a revision number can be specified. A revision history table can be should be maintained so that one is aware of the changes that happen to the document. So here's the table of contents. So basically the way this document is structured is there is an introduction section where an introduction to the product that's being tested that's described, and what are the main objectives of the testing, those are described, and then I'll talk in detail about each of these sections. So after the introduction there is a scope. So this is where the specific modules that are part of this testing or that are going to be included in this testing, or the kind of requirements that are going to be included in the testing, are described. Now it's not always possible to test a product 100%, 100%, and that's the reason the scoping is important. And the reason it's not possible is because it's expensive. It's both needs a lot of resources in terms of time and money. So that's the reason the scoping is very important. And there could be products where there are certain functions that are very important and critical, so those can be focused on for the testing effort. And if there are other less critical or secondary functionality, then those could be skipped in the initial testing effort. So it's up to the organization, up to the management, and based on their what their goals are, this scope is identified. Section 3 is the most important one, where the test strategy is decided. So this is where we will go through each of these subsections. One has to decide what is important and which of these test strategies are going to be used as part of the testing. Then the section 4 has information about environment requirements. If there are any specific environment details, then all of those can be specified in this environment requirements, and that's important to know as well, so that the test team is ready with that setup. Number 5 is the schedule. So that's where the scheduling is done, and when each of the testing strategies are going to be conducted, and so basically a schedule table is created. Then control procedures are described. So what kind of control procedures are going to be used, how are the reviews done, how are bug review meetings handled, and how is all of that information documented and tracked. Change requests, if there are some change requests, how are they handled, and defect reporting, when defects are found, how are they reported, how are they recorded, and then and one has to track through them as to where in the life cycle is that defect. Has it just been found by the quality team? Has it been assigned to a developer to work on and fix? Has a developer already fixed it? And if he has fixed it, then is it sent back to the quality team to re-verify and retest? So it's important to track that status, and all of that happens through defect reporting. So it's important to understand what kind of procedures are going to be followed to handle this process. Section 7 has a list of all the functions to be tested. Section 8 has information about resources. What are the resources available, and who's responsible for what? So that's specified in Section 8. Section 9 has a list of deliverables. What is it that's going to be finally delivered? Section 10 is suspension/exit criteria. There's resumption criteria. Now, for a project, this is a template, and it has all possible sections that could go into a test plan. the team that's coming up with the test plan has to then pick and choose what is relevant for their project and for their needs, and basically customize this document accordingly. So in this case, for the purpose of the course, you will be creating a test plan for your project, and again you will have to, depending on the project that you're working on, you'll have to customize this template and include the sections that make sense. So basically 10, 11 and 12. 12 is related to dependencies. What other kind of dependencies are there? Be it personnel dependencies, wherein you're dependent on, say, the developers in order to be able to test something. So those kind of things can be listed there. Software dependencies, if the product uses some third-party software, then we're dependent on that. So those are listed. If there are any hardware dependencies, those can be listed. And then there could be dependencies related to test data. Sometimes testing is not as straightforward. You could need test data, and who's going to provide that test data, and where are you going to get it from? So those kind of dependencies can be listed as well. Section 13 is related to risks. Any kind of risks are analyzed and listed. These risks could be related to schedule, related to the technical aspects, or the management, or personnel working on the team, or the requirements. So if there are risks, if it's applicable and if it makes sense, that's when they're listed in this section. Tools, if you're using any additional software tools to do the testing, there's a number of testing tools out there that help automate the processes. So that's where you identify those tools and list them, and how and in which parts of testing are you going to be using it. And then there's documentation section and approvals. So that's an overall the overall table of contents of the document. I'll quickly go over the different sections, and there's some text in here filled out for a sample a payroll system. So just to give you a sense for how these different sections can be written. So like I said, the introduction section basically describes the company and describes the product that's being tested, and if it's an existing product where some enhancements are being made, then what are those enhancements, and what is it that this new system is doing are listed out. So in this case, it says that the new system will provide users with certain menus, and it handles the addition and updation of employee information. It can print out some specific reports, and it can create a payroll file and transfer the information to their mainframe, and so on. So you basically list what those features are, the high-level features that are being added to the system. And then you describe the test plan objectives. So what are the main objectives of testing? What is it that you want to test? Are we testing all the functional requirements, all of the non-functional requirements of the system? So now this document goes along with a requirements document. So initially the team would have created a requirements document which has the complete requirement specification. So it goes along with that. So based on some of those requirements, we identify our main test plan objectives. So that's section 1. Once that's done, then section 2 is the scope. So here we specifically list the different modules that are going to be tested, and we can even get into details and list out the specific functionality or specific requirements that will get tested. So depending on the project, the scope can be organized into different subsections. So in this case, they've organized it into data entry. So what is the scope in terms of data entry for testing? What kind of reports are going to be tested? So there's three specific reports that are listed. So those are the ones that will get tested. The file transfer feature is going to get tested, and the security aspect is going to get tested. So that's the scope, and so the test plan is basically just going to focus on these four specific functionality and modules. Then section 3 specifies the test strategy. Now within the test strategy, there's different kinds of testing. So it identifies what is relevant and then lists them. So for this particular product, system testing typically should be done for the overall system to make sure that the overall system works. So that's what system testing is. Performance testing is, again, there's a number of different non-functional There could be non-functional requirements related to performance, related to loads, related to security, usability. So depending on what the criteria was or what the requirements were, you could have some test strategies for those specific things. So in this case, there's a performance, security, and automated test. They're also doing a stress and volume test because as part of their requirements, they wanted to make sure that more than 20 users can access the system at the same time. So they basically want to stress the system beyond those limits and make sure that it still works. Recovery tests, they want to make sure that it recovers from failures in a proper manner. So if that's important, then that can be included. Now again, to remind you, you don't have to have all of these strategies in your test plan. Whatever is relevant for your product or for your project is what gets included. Then there is a beta test and a user acceptance test. So these are the ones that are done at the very end when the product is ready and it's deployed on the client side. The user acceptance test is done on the client side typically by the client to make sure that all of their requirements are met. So the test strategy basically lists all of these different types of testing that will be done, and it also provides the details of how each of them will be done. Like for example, if it's system test, it should provide details of how the system testing will be done, what are the different test cases for system testing. Typically a system testing is black box testing, wherein you're testing the overall unit as a black box. So various test cases have to be written, and then how is it going to be done? Is it being done manually? Are some tools going to be used to do it and automate it? So those details will have to be specified under each of these sections as part of the test strategy. Then, like I mentioned, the environment requirements. So basically any specific requirements for the workstations that will be used for the testing, all of that should be listed here. So here for the data entry, they have some specific requirements for the workstation, so that's listed. Section 5 is about the test schedule. So this is where you have the different types of tests, and the timeline for each of them is listed out. So that's again pretty straightforward. It's a usual scheduling. All of the control procedures are listed as to how reviews are done and documented, how bug review meetings are handled, how are change requests done, or what kind of tools are going to be used for each of these. Defect reporting, are there some specific tools that will be used for defect reporting? Then those can be listed in here. And then all of the functions that will be tested can be listed out in section 7. So this is basically, again, this can come from the requirements specification document, and then the idea is then from this list, and we want to make sure that there are test cases for each and every function to be tested properly. Then there's resources and responsibilities. So that's where we list out what are the resources available, who is that test team, what are the responsibilities, and who's going to be doing what. So those details are specified. Then there is a deliverables section wherein the detailed deliverables and who's responsible for it and the completion date are listed out. And then there's suspension and exit criteria. At what time do we suspend testing? So if there's some specific criteria on that, those things can be specified in here. Resumption criteria, if testing has been suspended, then when can it be resumed again? If there are some rules pertaining to that, it can be listed. Any kind of dependencies in terms of personnel, software, hardware, or test data is what goes into these dependency sections. Similarly, any risks related to the schedule, or if there's some technical issues or management related issues, those can be specified in the risks section. Tools is where any of the automated testing tools that you use will be listed here. So say for example, for static analysis of code, if you're using CheckStyle or Find Bugs, so you would list those tools over here and indicate what and how they will be used. Say if you're using some tools for unit testing like JUnit, TestNG, so those will get listed, those can get listed as well. If you're doing other kind of automation, say for user interface testing, you're using Selenium or some other kind of tools to record the actions and automate the process of user interface testing, then those tools will get listed there. There's a number of other tools like for performance, there's a JMeter. So there are tools that can be used, and where the scripts can be written in order to automate the process. So all of those will have to be identified and listed in this tools section. And then finally the documentation that will be available finally at the end of the test phase is all of those documents are listed over here. Now again, this is a customizable, and the last page is an approvals page where the sign off happens. So like I said, it's a detailed plan with all possible sections in there, and it's up to the team to customize it as per their needs. So for the purpose of this course and for the purpose of your project, you should definitely have an introduction and scope section. Really the most important section is section 3, which is the test strategy, where you identify the different kinds of testing, and detailed test cases for each of them have to be specified over there. And I'll show you an example of what I mean by how test cases can be specified. So if you have system testing, you have to specify the test case for the different test cases for system testing, and how will it be done? Is it manual? Is it through use of a tool? And then for unit testing, you should have, in fact, in here there should be functional testing, and you can also specify the individual units that will get tested, and unit testing can be listed here, and that's useful for the purpose of our project. So I would want you to do that. Integration testing, if integration testing is being done, then what kind of strategy is used, so that can get listed in here. So that section number 3 is very important. And then for any environment requirements, that's important. Schedule is important, and then resources and responsibilities are important, and any dependencies and risks, if that makes sense, then you can include them. Tools, again, section 14, tools is also very important for from the class perspective for the project. The other parts, you can include them if you think it makes sense and if it's relevant. So let me show you an example of a test case, how test cases look. It can be a separate document, but it's ideal if you just include these test cases also into the test plan. So if you're doing an overall system testing, then and especially if it's manual, if you're dealing with user interfaces, test cases can be defined in this manner, where you have your first test case, a brief description of which functionality is it testing, the method of testing. In this case, we're saying it's manual. If it's a browser-based software, then which browser is it being tested on, and then basically list the execution steps, and after each execution step, the expected result. So typically this would be the case with a software with a lot of user interface, where there are multiple steps, and at the end of each step you want to verify that you're getting the expected result. So this is one way in which you can have all of your test cases. If it's a unit testing, then the test cases would be different. You would have the unit, the name of the unit that you're testing, and the list of the methods, and then the inputs that you're passing to the methods, and you're going to try there's going to be different test cases in order to test all possible kinds of inputs or classes of inputs. So you would specify the method name, the input that's being passed, the expected output, and then the actual output that you receive that you got from the testing. So typically those would be the things. But in this case, where there's a manual testing of UI being done, then you have the execution step, and then the expected result. And then you can have an additional column to document the actual result, or what is it that was actually observed. So that gets added, that can get added as a third column for as the next step, wherein you're documenting the outcome of the testing. So there's a number of tests here. So here's a second test that verifies if the executive live chart opens successfully in a browser. So this testing is being done in a browser manually. And then you can also point to the feature or the requirement from the requirements document. Each feature or each requirement would be identified with a number or an ID. So you can point to that requirement saying that this test case is taking care of this specific requirement. So again, you see that the different execution steps and the expected results from it. So that's to show you an example of a test case document. So typically you should have this kind of tables of test cases that are included in the test strategy in the software test plan. Okay, so that's all I have about the software test plan. Thank you.